The morning started like any other, but for the girl sitting quietly in the third row, it felt heavier than usual. She walked into the classroom with slow steps, hoping she could blend into the background the way she usually did. She never caused trouble, never talked much, and never tried to be the center of attention. She simply wanted to get through each day without anyone noticing her too much. But today, she could already sense something was off. Her music class was usually a place where she kept her head down, listened carefully, and avoided eye contact. The teacher, who often seemed stressed and impatient, paid more attention to the louder, more confident students. For someone like her, who preferred quiet corners and gentle work, it was easy to be overlooked. But on this particular day, the teacher was already in a bad mood. The class had been noisy earlier, and she was looking for someone to blame. Unfortunately, the girl walked in at the wrong time. She had barely reached her seat when she accidentally brushed against a desk, causing a soft thud. It was nothing big, no one was hurt. Nothing was broken, but the sudden sound made a few students snicker. That was all the teacher needed. Careful. The teacher snapped sharply, staring right at her. You need to watch where you're going. Honestly, you move like you aren't even paying attention. The girl froze. She whispered a quiet apology, but her voice was so soft that it was drowned out by a few scattered laughs around the room. She lowered her gaze, hoping the moment would pass quickly. But the teacher wasn't finished. If you're this clumsy, the teacher continued, her tone carrying judgment, I wonder if you can even play a simple tune on the piano without making a mess of it. A few students gasped. The girl felt her chest tighten. She wasn't used to being called out in front of everyone. She felt her cheeks warm as she stared at the edge of her desk. Her mind began racing, wishing she could disappear. She had always feared moments like this, moments when all eyes turned to her, expecting her to speak or act or defend herself. But she stayed quiet, hoping silence would make the tension fade. Instead, the teacher folded her arms and said, well, why don't you come up and show us what you can do? Let's see if you can play even a basic melody. The class could use a demonstration. The room shifted. Students straightened up, sensing the drama growing. Some whispered to each other. Others grinned, anticipating entertainment at her expense. The girl felt her stomach drop. She tried to avoid the teacher's eyes, hoping she might change her mind. But the teacher lifted her chin sharply. Up front, now. The girl stood up slowly, wishing her legs didn't feel as heavy as stone. She wasn't afraid of the piano. In fact, it was the only thing she truly felt connected to, something she practiced every evening at home. But no one at school knew that. She kept her music life private, a small safe world she didn't want anyone to disturb. What scared her now wasn't the instrument, it was the attention, the pressure, the laughter waiting to happen. She walked toward the piano with short, hesitant steps. Each footstep felt louder than the last, echoing in her ears more than they did in the room. She could feel every pair of eyes following her. Even those who usually ignored her were suddenly interested. The teacher stood beside the piano with an expectant look. Sit, she instructed. The girl sat down, trying to steady her shaking hands under the piano's edge. She took a deep breath, but it didn't help much. Her heart continued pounding. She could hear the whispers floating from the back of the room. She's gonna mess up. Does she even know how to play? This is going to be funny. She pressed her lips together, wishing they would all stop talking. Wishing she could somehow go back in time and avoid bumping into that desk. Wishing she wasn't forced into this moment. The teacher tapped her foot impatiently. Play a simple tune. Anything basic. Let the class hear something. Her voice carried the tone of someone certain the girl would fail. The girl swallowed hard. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling lightly. She knew dozens of simple tune songs she had practiced as a child. Melodies she could play with her eyes closed. But her mind felt blank with nerves. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm inside. She thought about home. She thought about her grandmother, the one who had sat beside her for hours, teaching her how to press each key gently, how to feel the music rather than simply memorize it. Those memories were warm, safe, comforting. She remembered her grandmother's voice saying, when you feel scared, let the music guide you. It will never hurt you. And slowly, very slowly, she began to breathe more evenly. One of her hands relaxed first, then the other. She opened her eyes again, letting her gaze settle on the familiar black and white pattern of the keys. She still felt the weight of the stairs around her. She still heard the faint laughter. But somewhere deep inside, she also felt something else, a quiet spark, a memory of who she was when no one else was watching. She lifted her fingers a little higher, ready to play. The room, sensing the start of something, grew slightly quieter. The teacher crossed her arms, waiting for the embarrassment she expected to unfold. But the girl wasn't thinking about the teacher anymore. She wasn't thinking about the whispers. She was thinking of the music she loved. And in that moment, she realized she had a choice. She could play something simple and shaky out of fear, or she could trust her heart and let the music speak for her. Her fingers touched the keys gently. Just as she drew in a breath to begin, the entire class leaned forward, unaware that the moment was about to shift in a direction none of them expected. The girl sat at the piano, with her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. The room felt strangely still, as if everyone was holding their breath. She could feel her heart beating fast, almost too fast, and her hands weren't completely steady yet. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't sure what it was, courage maybe, or something deeper that she hadn't felt in a long time. All she knew was that she wasn't going to let fear control her this time. The teacher watched her with a look that wasn't exactly patient. It was the kind of look that said she expected this moment to end with embarrassment. The students were waiting too, whispering softly, some trying to hide their excitement. For them, this was entertainment. For the girl, it felt like a test she never asked for. She breathed in deeply and let her fingers touch the keys more firmly. She didn't start playing right away. Instead, she let her mind drift to the piano at home. It wasn't new or shiny. Some keys were a little worn, and the bench made a small creak every time she sat on it. But it was the place she felt safe. It was where she learned not just music but patience, emotion, and calm. It reminded her of her grandmother's voice, the gentle tone, the soft smile, the way she would say, "You don't have to play perfectly, just play from your heart." Those words floated through her mind now like a warm breeze. A small bit of fear melted away. She lifted her right hand and pressed the first key. It made a soft, clear sound, simple, familiar, safe. Her left hand followed. She started playing slowly, at a pace that allowed her breathing to stay calm. But as she played, she could feel the eyes on her, the whispers, the doubt, and most of all, the pressure. Her fingers moved, but her mind felt divided, one part trying to focus on the music, the other worrying about what the class thought of her. She could sense the teacher's impatience growing. Louder, the teacher instructed sharply. "People in the back can't hear you." The sudden command made her shoulders tense. Her hands slipped slightly on the keys, and the tune stumbled. A few kids laughed under their breath. She felt the heat of embarrassment rise again. She forced her breathing to slow. She had to block out everything else, the whispers, the stares, the pressure. She had to remember why she loved music in the first place. She placed her hands back on the keys and let the notes flow again, one after another. But even as she played, she knew this simple tune wasn't enough. It wasn't her. It wasn't what she really wanted to express. Inside her, something kept tugging at her. A quiet voice telling her she didn't have to stay small. She didn't have to hide. She didn't have to play something safe just because the teacher expected her to fail. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. So she continued with the simple tune, letting it guide her through the moment. The melody wasn't impressive, not compared to what she truly knew how to play, but it was steady, soft, gentle. The teacher sighed heavily. "You call that playing? Put some effort into it. You're barely touching the keys." Her tone carried frustration, disappointment, and something that felt almost personal. The girl's hands froze mid-note. She didn't look at the teacher. She didn't look at the class. She kept her eyes on the piano, but her vision blurred slightly. It wasn't fair. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She was just trying to survive the moment. But the teacher's comments felt like sharp little pins poking at her confidence. She closed her eyes again. Her breathing grew unsteady, but she forced herself not to cry. She had cried enough times in private. She refused to cry now, in front of everyone. She thought again of her grandmother, how she used to tap her shoulder gently and whisper, "Music is your strength, not your weakness." Those words echoed in her heart slowly. Her breathing steadied again. She placed her hands back on the keys, not for the teacher, not for the class, but for herself. But before she could begin again, a boy from the back of the room called out, "She's dragging it. This is boring." Others laughed. The girl's stomach twisted. People didn't realize how much their words could sting. They didn't see the effort she was putting into simply staying calm. The teacher didn't stop them. She didn't defend the girl. She simply shook her head as if she already expected this. "You see?" the teacher said with an exasperated sigh. "This is what happens when a student doesn't practice enough. You should take this as a lesson. Confidence matters. Preparation matters, but the girl didn't hear the rest. Her mind filled with the memory of her grandmother's face. The warm smile, the kindness, the belief. Something inside her snapped, not in anger, but in determination. She realized that no matter what she did, the teacher had already decided she wasn't capable. No matter how gently she played, the class would laugh. No matter how quiet she tried to be, someone would find a reason to mock her. So she had a choice. She could let the teacher's words push her down, or she could rise above them. She placed both hands firmly on the keys and straightened her back. Her shoulders relaxed. Her fingers settled into a position she hadn't used in a long time, not for simple tunes, but for the kinds of pieces she practiced alone in her room. This time, she wasn't shaking. A soft but confident breath left her lips. The teacher noticed the change in her posture and frowned. "What are you doing? I didn't ask you to play anything complicated." But the girl didn't answer. She didn't even look up. For the first time in the entire class, she felt a strange sense of calm, as if everything around her, the whispers, the stares, even the teacher's tone, was fading into the background. She placed her fingers on the exact keys where her grandmother once guided her hands. The entire class watched, confused by her sudden confidence. She took one last breath and then her fingers moved, not slowly this time, not shyly, not with fear, but with purpose. Her hands glided from one end of the keyboard to the other in smooth, flowing motions. The sound that filled the room wasn't soft or hesitant. It was rich, full, and emotional. The kind of sound that didn't come from simple practice, it came from passion. Conversation stopped mid-whisper. Laughter died instantly. Even the teacher, who had been so sure this moment would only prove her point, stood completely still. The girl didn't notice any of it. She didn't see the shocked faces. She didn't see the teacher's expression change. She didn't see the students leaning forward, trying to understand how someone so quiet could create something so powerful. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive, real, honest. Her heart guided every note. And once she started, there was no turning back. The classroom, which moments ago had been filled with doubt and judgment, was now filled with something else entirely: silence. The kind of silence that only appears when everyone in the room is too stunned to speak. And as she continued to play, the moment grew heavier, not with fear, but with awe. The girl didn't look up, but she could feel the shift in the air. Finally, she was no longer the quiet, overlooked student. She was the one holding the room. And for the first time, the class saw her for who she truly was. The sound of the piano filled the entire classroom in a way no one expected. It was bold, warm, and full of feeling. Every note connected to the next, creating a river of music that seemed to flow straight from her heart. The girl didn't think about the class anymore, or the teacher, or the whispers that had filled the room earlier. All she felt was the familiar comfort of the keys beneath her fingers. Her hands moved with confidence, not rushed but not hesitant either. Each note felt like it belonged exactly where she placed it. She had played this piece many times at home, often late in the evening when the world felt quiet. But playing it here, in front of everyone, felt different. It felt freeing. It felt brave. For so long, she had kept her talent hidden, thinking no one would understand it. But now, as she played, she realized something. This wasn't just about proving anything to the teacher or her classmates. This was about finally allowing herself to be seen. At the back of the room, the students who had been laughing moments before were now silent, their eyes wide as they watched her fingers move quickly and gracefully across the keys. The melody rose higher, then softened, then rose again, each shift in tone showing a part of her that no one had ever known existed. The teacher stood beside the piano, arms no longer crossed. She wasn't frowning anymore. She wasn't smirking. She seemed frozen, as if she had forgotten she was supposed to be in charge of the room. Her eyes were on the girl's hands, watching movements far more skilled than anything she had expected. Even the boy who had called her boring earlier couldn't find a single word to say. His mouth hung slightly open as he stared at the girl who had surprised the whole class. The girl continued to play, letting the music guide her. She didn't think about what the teacher would say afterward or what the class would think of her now. She simply followed the rhythm, the rise and fall of the melody, the gentle pressure of each key. At one point, the classroom felt so silent that it was as if the entire building had paused just to listen. The windows stood still. The hallway beyond the door seemed quiet. For the first time that day, the girl didn't feel small. She didn't feel nervous. She didn't feel invisible. She felt strong. The piece carried her through memories, dinners with her family, Long evenings practicing while her grandmother watched proudly. Moments when the world seemed to fade and the only thing that existed was the piano. All those memories wrapped around her like a blanket, making the classroom feel a little bit like home. She reached a part of the piece that was more intense, quicker notes, deeper emotion, a burst of feeling that she had always loved. Her fingers flew across the keys, pressing each note with purpose. Her body was relaxed but focused, every part of her moved by the music. The class leaned forward, drawn in by the sudden change in tempo. Some students blinked rapidly, unsure how someone so quiet could create something so powerful. Others sat frozen, completely absorbed. As the music continued to rise, the teacher took a small step back, as though the sound alone pushed her. It wasn't harsh or overwhelming, but it was full of something emotional and real, something the teacher hadn't expected at all. The girl didn't see any of this. She didn't know how shocked everyone looked. All she felt was the music. All she heard was the piano. All she cared about was finishing the piece the way her grandmother taught her, with meaning. As the melody began to soften again, her hands slowed. The notes turned gentle, like a soft breeze at the end of a long day. Her fingers moved lightly, almost like they were floating above the keys. The class leaned in closer, not wanting to miss a single sound. Near the end of the piece, she paused briefly, not because she forgot the next note, but because she wanted to breathe in the moment. This was a moment she had never thought she would have. A moment where she wasn't hiding. A moment where she wasn't being laughed at or judged. A moment where she was simply herself. She pressed the final note gently. It was soft, simple, and pure. Then there was silence. Absolute, heavy silence. The kind of silence that comes when no one wants to move. No one wants to break the moment. No one wants to breathe too loudly. The girl let her hands rest in her lap. Her heart was still beating fast, but not from fear this time. It was from the rush of letting herself shine. She didn't turn around immediately. She didn't want to face whatever reaction was waiting. She wasn't sure if the class would laugh again, or if the teacher would scold her for playing something different. But she slowly lifted her head and allowed herself to look. The student in the front row stared at her as if he couldn't believe she was the same person who had walked to the piano shaking. Another girl had her hands covering her mouth, shocked beyond words. Even the boy who had mocked her earlier looked stunned. His usual smirk was gone. His eyes were focused, almost respectful. And the teacher looked like she didn't know what to say. She opened her mouth once, closed it, then opened it again. No sound came out at first, as though the words got stuck somewhere inside her. The girl sat still, waiting. Finally, the teacher spoke, but her voice was softer than it had been all day. Where did you learn to play like that? The question wasn't sharp or sarcastic. It carried genuine confusion, maybe even curiosity. The girl looked at her hands before she answered. At home, she said quietly. My grandmother taught me. There was another moment of silence. The teacher didn't have a quick response. She blinked, looked at the piano, then at the girl again. It was clear she hadn't expected this. Not the skill, not the confidence, not the emotion. The class waited to see what would happen next. The girl felt a small breath escape her. She didn't know what the teacher would say. She didn't know if she'd be praised or ignored. But for the first time, she felt strong enough to face whatever came. She had played her heart out. No one could take that away. Little by little, the students began to shift in their seats again. A girl near the back whispered, "That was amazing." Another student nodded slowly, but no one clapped yet. They were all too stunned to even think of it. Finally, one student in the front gave a small tap of applause. Then another, then a few more, and soon, the room was filled with clapping, loud, warm, genuine. The girl stared at them, unsure how to react. She had never been applauded like this before. It felt unreal, almost like she was dreaming. But she wasn't dreaming. For the first time in her life, her talent was seen and valued. As the applause filled the classroom, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: belonging. She smiled softly, a small smile, but a heartfelt one. She knew this moment would stay with her forever. And she also knew something else. This was only the beginning. For the room fell into a deep, warm silence as she finished the last note, letting it fade gently into the air. For a moment, there was nothing: no clapping, no whispering, no shifting in seats, just stillness. It was the kind of silence that only happens when something touches people so deeply that they forget to breathe. She sat there at the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys. She wasn't sure what to do next. Should she stand? Should she walk away? Should she smile? She didn't know. All she knew was that she had played from her heart, and something inside her felt lighter, as if she had finally said something she had been holding in for years. Then, slowly, someone near the back of the hall let out a small gasp, a sound full of disbelief. Another person put a hand over their mouth. A few people blinked rapidly, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. And then it happened. A wave of applause crashed over the room. Not polite applause. Not hesitant applause. It was the loud, overwhelming kind, the kind that felt like it came from people's souls. People stood up, one after another, until almost the entire room was on their feet. Hands clapped together so hard that the echo bounced off the walls. Some people cheered. A few even wiped tears from their eyes. She sat there in shock. She had never imagined anything like this. The CEO's eyes were wide with surprise. His mouth was slightly open, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. The staff members who had mocked her earlier no longer looked amused. Their faces were pale, their eyes lowered, their arrogance completely gone. One of them whispered to another, "I didn't know she could do that." Another muttered, "We shouldn't have said anything to her." But she didn't look at them. She didn't look at anyone. She just stared at the piano, letting the applause wash over her. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into a dream. Finally, the CEO stepped closer to her. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, as if approaching something delicate. When he reached her side, the applause softened. People watched, waiting. He leaned slightly toward her and spoke gently. "That wasn't just talent," he said. "That was a gift. A real one." She felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't know how to respond. "I'm sorry for how you were treated tonight," he continued. "You deserved better. And you certainly deserve recognition for what you just shared with us." She finally looked up at him, her eyes unsure. I just played what I felt." "Exactly," he replied. "And that's what makes it special. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were honest. And honesty in music is rare." The room fell quiet again, but this time it was a warm, quiet one filled with admiration. He turned to the guests and said, "We're honored to have witnessed this moment. Truly honored." Then he stepped back, giving her space. Someone from the crowd called out, "Play another." Another voice joined, "Yes, one more." More voices followed. Building into a chorus, she looked around nervously. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She wasn't sure if she should play again. She didn't want to seem like she was showing off. But the CEO gently gestured toward the piano. "Only if you want to. No pressure." She took a small breath. Her hands trembled a little. She didn't know what she would play. She hadn't prepared anything, but something inside her, a quiet, brave part, pushed her forward. She placed her hands on the keys again. This time she didn't try to perform. She just allowed her fingers to move naturally, flowing into a soft, calming melody. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It didn't have big, powerful moments. It was simple, gentle, almost like a lullaby. And yet, just like before, the room fell silent. People closed their eyes. Some leaned back in their chairs. Some clasped their hands together. It was music that felt like home, music that reminded people of childhood, of warm nights, of comforting memories. It touched them in a different way than the first piece. When she finished, the applause came again. But this time it was softer, not because they weren't impressed, but because the moment felt fragile and peaceful. The CEO stepped forward once more. "I don't know how you learned to play like that," he said, "but I think you have something extraordinary." She looked down, almost embarrassed. "I practiced a lot. My old piano teacher always said that music should come from the heart." "She taught you well," he replied. The guests slowly returned to their seats, still buzzing with excitement. Some came up to her, not too close, but close enough to offer words of admiration. "That was beautiful. You have real talent. I didn't expect that at all. You surprised us in the best way." Every compliment made her feel a mix of happiness and disbelief. She had never been praised like this before. Meanwhile, the staff members who had mocked her earlier stood nervously off to the side. They didn't dare approach her. They exchanged worried looks, clearly realizing how wrong they had been. Eventually, one of them took a hesitant step forward. He said softly, I'm sorry for what we said earlier. We didn't know." She glanced at him, her expression calm. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even upset anymore. She simply nodded. "It's okay," she said. "But please don't talk to anyone like that again." The staff member's face reddened with shame. "You're right. We won't," another one added. "We're truly sorry." Their voices were quiet, sincere. They seemed to understand the lesson. After the guests had returned to chatting among themselves, The CEO invited her to sit at a small table near the front of the room. He poured her a glass of water and offered her a gentle smile. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm just still surprised." "So am I," he said with a light laugh. "In the best way." She took a sip of the water, her hands finally steadying. "Do you play often?" he asked. "Not really," she admitted. "I used to play more when I was younger, but now I only play when I'm alone or when I'm stressed." "That's a shame," he replied, "because what you played tonight wasn't just skill. It was emotion. It was clarity. It was something people don't forget easily." She didn't know what to say. It felt strange to hear such strong praise from someone so important. After a moment, he leaned back thoughtfully. "I'd like you to come to our next event," he said. "Not as a participant but as a guest. Someone we invite personally. Someone we value." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. She felt a warmth in her chest. No one had ever invited her to something like that before. He continued, "I think people need to hear you play again, but only if you want to. I'm not asking you for a performance. I'm offering you recognition for the talent you already have." She thought for a moment. She didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know if she was ready for something like that. But she did know one thing. Tonight had changed her. She had walked into the event feeling small, unnoticed, and underestimated. She had been mocked and doubted, but she had faced it with courage, and her music had spoken for her. "I'd like that," she finally said softly. The CEO smiled. "Good. Then we'll make it happen." As the night continued, she sat quietly, taking in everything around her: the soft lights, the murmurs of conversation, the warm atmosphere. People no longer saw her as someone unimportant. They saw her as someone gifted, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. A gentle calm settled in her heart as she looked at the piano one more time. She had played. She had spoken. And the world had listened. The rest of the day moved slowly, almost like the world around her hadn't caught up to what happened in the classroom. Even after the applause ended and everyone returned to their seats, the girl felt the echo of it inside her. It followed her through the hallways, through lunch, through every small moment that came afterward. She had spent so long trying to hide her talent, trying not to draw attention to herself, that she didn't know how to handle being seen, really seen. As she walked out of the classroom later that afternoon, a few students who had never spoken to her before smiled at her. Others gave a small nod as she passed. They didn't say much, but their expressions carried a quiet respect she had never felt from them. She wasn't used to any of this. She walked slowly, hugging her books to her chest, unsure how to react. Part of her wanted to shrink back again, afraid the attention would fade and the whispers would return. But another part of her, the part that had played the piano fearlessly, felt lighter, almost like she was walking on air. When she stepped outside, the breeze touched her face. It reminded her of the way her grandmother always opened the windows when she practiced, letting the fresh air mix with the music. She smiled softly at the memory. Her grandmother had always told her that playing the piano wasn't just about hitting the right notes. It was about telling a story without words, about letting people feel what she felt. Today, for the first time, she understood what her grandmother meant. As she headed toward the school gate, she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey!" someone called out. She turned to see a girl from her class jogging toward her. The girl wasn't someone she had ever talked to, but she had been sitting in the front during the performance. "That was really good," the girl said, slightly out of breath but smiling warmly. I didn't know you could play like that." "None of us did." The girl with the piano talent felt her cheeks grow warm. Compliments always made her shy. She didn't know what to do with them. "Thank you," she said softly. The other girl nodded. "I'm serious. It was amazing. You should play more often." She didn't know how to answer that, so she just nodded back. The girl smiled again before waving and heading in another direction. She watched her go, then turned and continued walking, feeling a little less alone than before. By the time she reached home, the weight of the day had started to settle. The excitement mixed with exhaustion, and her steps felt heavier as she walked inside. Her mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner. "How was school?" her mother asked without looking up. The girl hesitated. How could she explain what happened? How could she describe the way the room fell silent, the way her fingers danced across the keys, the way everyone stared at her like they had never truly seen her before? She walked farther into the kitchen and placed her bag down. "It was good," she said simply. She wasn't ready to explain everything yet, not until she processed it herself. Her mother smiled and continued cooking, unaware of how much her daughter had changed in just one day. Later that evening, the girl quietly moved to the living room where the old piano sat. Its keys were worn, some slightly discolored from years of use. She ran her fingers gently across them. The room felt peaceful, still. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. Not to practice, not to prepare for anything, just to play. She took a soft breath and let a slow, gentle melody fill the room. It wasn't the same piece she had played earlier. This one was softer, more calm, like a whisper. As she played, she thought about all the moments that led to today, the teasing, the quiet lunches, the times she felt unseen. She thought about the teacher who had tried to embarrass her, and how all of that had changed in a single moment. She didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't feel scared. She felt grateful. Not for the teasing or the embarrassment, but for the strength she didn't know she had until she needed it. The melody grew slightly louder, filling the living room. Her mother peeked her head in when she heard the music, but didn't interrupt. She simply smiled softly and let her daughter continue. When the girl finished playing, she sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle again. She wasn't the same person she had been yesterday, and she knew she wouldn't be the same tomorrow, either. Things were changing slowly, but surely. The next day at school, she walked into the classroom with her head a little higher. The room felt different. The teacher, who had tried to humiliate her just the day before, seemed unsure how to behave now. She avoided eye contact at first, then cleared her throat awkwardly. When the class settled down, the teacher addressed them with a stiff posture. "Before we begin today, I want to acknowledge what happened yesterday," she said, her voice more controlled than usual. "I didn't expect such a performance. It was impressive." The girl listened silently, unsure what to make of the teacher's tone. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it wasn't dismissive either. It was something in between, something uncomfortable. But the girl didn't need an apology to move forward. She had already found her peace throughout the day. More classmates came up to her. Some asked how long she had been playing. Others asked if she could teach them a few notes sometime. She smiled politely and answered when she felt comfortable, though she wasn't used to so many people wanting her attention. The most surprising part came during the music class later that week. The instructor asked if she would be willing to perform at the school assembly the following month. Her heart skipped at the thought, performing not just for her class, but for the entire school. For a moment, she felt the old fear try to creep back in. The fear of being judged, the fear of making a mistake. But then she remembered the feeling she had when she finished playing in the classroom. The feeling of confidence that she had earned. She nodded slowly. "I can try," she said. The instructor smiled warmly. "Trying is all you need to do." That night, when she sat at the piano again, she didn't feel nervous about the future. She didn't feel pressure to be perfect. She just felt ready, ready to grow, ready to be herself, ready to let the world hear her. She began to practice the piece she wanted to play at the assembly, something full of emotion, something that told her story the way words never could. Her fingers moved confidently, each note clear and full. As the melody grew, she realized something important. Her talent wasn't something to hide. It was something to share, something to be proud of, and she was, for the first time in her life. She felt proud. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her here stronger, braver, and more confident than she had ever imagined. Whatever came next, she knew she could face it, because now, she knew the truth. She wasn't invisible, she wasn't ordinary, she wasn't someone to be dismissed. She was a girl with a voice expressed not through words, but through music, a girl whose talent had changed everything. And this time, the whole world would hear her.